ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a special CTV edition of Eric's View, where today, I'm going to be interviewing one of the most humble, one of the most legendary runners in the marathon world. In fact, I call him the Rocky Balboa of marathon running. 8-time Boston and New York City marathon runner, the legendary Mr. Bill Rodgers. Bill, thank you so much for joining me.
I'm glad to be here. Glad to be here in Staten Island. We're here for the Tommy Hart superhero 5K run tomorrow morning, but tonight there's a dinner celebrating Tommy, and with Jeff Benjamin from Staten Island is the guy who's behind all of this. We're friends, you know. In running, you make friends. That's what it is. There's a lot of competition, but you make friends.
And he is a great friend to have. And
Jeff loves the sport, and he has been instrumental in Staten Island and throughout the sport everywhere. You know, online blog and everything. He writes for he knows the sport inside and out. You know, and it's a big sport. So you really need someone who really knows it well to do all that he is doing in the community here. You know, saluting a lot of the athletics here over decades and decades. You know, so it's fun. It's good to be here.
well, as for those folks, you know, here's a little thing about William Henry Rodgers. Born December 23rd, 1947, Hartford, Connecticut. Yes. And like your family, what was your family life like?
Well, you know, my dad wasn't an athlete. He was more of an artistic type of guy. He liked to play the piano. He loved music, and he was a math teacher. I was terrible in math, you know, and all that. But I've kind of found running when I was a sophomore in high school. You know, I ran well in the gym class mile. This is 1963. The JFK was president and talked about Americans working out and that sort of thing, you know. And so I joined cross country with my brother, Charlie, and our best friend. You know, we were friends, my good friend Jason, you know, since we were kids, little babies actually, you know. So we started running cross country. We didn't run very far. We'd run like 2 miles. We didn't even run 5K, you know. This is when we were in high school. But it was before the big marathon boom, before the New York City marathon boom, you know, that took off in '76, you know, and so it was a kind of a different landscape. You know, women weren't involved in the sport so much then for reasons tied in with the International Olympic Committee. It was a small sport in a way, but it was still a global sport because running is big all over the world, you know. Everyone can either run or walk, you know. And find something in track and field that you might want to do. You might want to throw the shot, or you might be a high jumper or a pole vaulter. And I was a 2-miler. That's what I did.
And the prep school running that you did got you noticed by a local school, in-state school, Wesleyan, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, you're right. I was running the state meet, and a Wesleyan student there, Amby Burfoot, who would go on to win the Boston Marathon as a senior at Wesleyan University, Middletown, Connecticut guy. He kind of recruited me, you know, would you be interested in going to Wesleyan? I said, yeah, of course. I knew it was a really good academic college, you know. It was a little intense for me. But we also had another teammate named Jeff Galloway who went on to make our Olympic team in '72. And he went on to become a coach. And he has coached 200,000 people to run their first marathon. So it was a little college, but we had a lot of fun. And if you have fun with your running, you know, you keep doing it. You find a way to get out the door, you know, and next thing you know, you're doing races. The next thing you know, you're doing 10Ks, and then maybe even a marathon, you know. That's what happened with me.
And Andy Barefoot, for those people who don't know, he went on to win the 1968 Boston Marathon, and he also later became the editor, or now still current editor, of Runner's World magazine.
Yes, exactly. He was always a good writer. You know, I remember coming back, you know, and seeing a paper he had written. He'd be getting an A on it, you know, an A-. I was not a very good writer. He's a smart guy. You know, but overall he had a passion for the sport because his high school cross-country coach was an American Olympian named Johnny Kelly, who was the last American guy to win Boston in 1957. So Amy had this dream as a high school kid, and then in college, can I do it? Can I do this? Could I win Boston? And when he won it, he came back to the dorms. He didn't even have his medal on. He didn't talk about it much. He was just kind of a really quiet character. He was a great competitor, but he did win. And years later, I moved to Boston from Hartford, my hometown, and saw the marathon. I didn't have any idea what it was really like. It's like, if you live here and you went into this New York City and you saw New York, you said, wow, this is intense. This is really intense, Thousands of people racing through the city streets, taking over the whole city. It's just phenomenal, the energy. And I was stunned when I saw the Boston Marathon. I said, now I know why Amby had that dream and why his coach won it in 1957,
When you were at Wesleyan College, what type of routine or regimen did they have you go through for preparing for each meet or race?
We were fairly independent. We had a good coach, though, Coach Elmer Swanson. He was actually a hurdler in his younger days, but he let us have some freedom and find our way. So he was a middle of the road coach. He didn't push us so hard we got injured. But Amby was putting in a lot of miles, so was Galloway. They were both marathon types, 2-milers, on the indoor track circuit. At the different indoor track meets, like in Philadelphia, here in New York, maybe at the Meadowlands, or at the Madison Square Garden, and so they were some of the best in the country then. I was trying to stay with them, and I couldn't, But I ran at Van Cortlandt Park with Amby, and the IC4A championships, when the Villanova runners were there, and they were some of the best, and. So I was behind them, but I was trying to learn from them. But so I didn't train as much as they did, but I was improving. And every year, Amby would say to me, try to run some during the summer. And I never did, until my senior year. My senior year, Amby had graduated, and that summer I trained more. I ran like 5, 6, 7 miles, every day. And I really ran much better that fall. So the continuity of training really pays off.
Because I know in every different sport there's different ways of training, or preparing. Like in other team sports, you prepare for an opponent, but in marathon running, you're preparing really for the road.
Yeah.
Of all the marathons that you've ran, which one was the most difficult to prepare for?
New York and Boston. I've raced a marathon. I've won a marathon on 5 continents. And most of the marathons around the world, the modern marathons, modern era, starting in the after New York, the Fibro New York in '76 kicked off the boom worldwide. London Marathon started in '81, Berlin, Tokyo, and Beijing. So most of these races are fairly flat. Some of them have some hills and big bridges like New York, like Stockholm Marathon. I ran Stockholm. That's a great marathon. But New York is the toughest marathon I've ever run because it's like cross country. You're always going around corners. You're climbing bridges. You're trying to stay on your feet. You're going around corners. Coming off the Queensboro Bridge, and it's really like a boxing match. It's like a boxing match, but you always, you respect your competition, but you're trying to win. You're trying to do your best. And 50,000 runners run it today, but my first marathon was terrible. I dropped out.
I heard recently in the first one, especially the last 6 miles, you had some difficulty trying to finish that, especially in those days.
I was crushed because I got dehydrated. It was a warm day. Warm spring day. It was the Boston Marathon. I had no idea how to pace myself. They did not have pacers along the course. Today there are pacers in all the marathons, the big marathons. Someone runs with a big sign, 8 minute per mile pace, 9 minute per mile pace. And Boston starts on a hill. And if you start too fast, then you get caught in kind of a dangerous pace, and you're up in front, and all the smart runners are waiting. The professional runners, they just bide their time. They're really, really fit. Everything in racing is your heart, your cardio, and your pacing and your training. And if you've trained well, then these top runners will start pushing it after about halfway. 13, 15 miles, they'll throw in a surge for 300 yards, 400 yards. Can you stay with that?
Me personally, I don't think I could. I can't even do a 5K race at all. I can't. It's just for me personally. Like my brother actually has now run 4 New York City marathons.
Yeah, it's a tough race. But this is what it's kind of like you're learning as you go. So I got beat up. I was beat up my first marathon because I didn't have a friend to run with. My second marathon, I went to a little tiny race, and I ran with a friend. And he paced me. It was 5 laps, 5 miles, and I knew, and it was cooler weather. I said, "Now I'm not sweating. I'm not getting cramps, blisters. You can get beat up in the marathon, and the best runners do. Even the very best, can struggle. Like Karui, the Boston champion from last year. This year at Boston, we had wild, crazy, tough, cold, windy, rainy weather."
In fact, there was an American woman that won this year.
Yes. Desi Linden won. It was a huge breakthrough race for her individually, even though she was a champion runner before. She had come within 2 seconds of winning Boston once before. And she's an Olympian. She was 7th in Rio Olympic Games. She's really a smart runner, very careful, and finally she had a breakthrough. But Karui, the world champion, who won Boston last year, he came in 2nd this year. He tried to bust the race wide open. If it was normal weather, I think he could have won. I think he would have won. But it was just, Mother Nature is the great challenge. Can you race your competition and Mother Nature? And he went for it. He went for it with everything he had, and he almost won. It was like this, but it was just. That's why racing is really interesting. You could be the very best in the world, but you could get knocked off your perch, and it happens to everybody. The Olympic gold medalist, but Desi beat some runners who were faster than her, on a different course. But she's one of these really feisty runners who kind of comes through no matter what. And it was her day, and it will last forever,
Getting back to you, like after Wesleyan College, you went through what was a very difficult period of your life, where you stopped racing apparently, and also went through some hardships and some adversity. But this was the period that sort of got you back to where you were in a sense, like sort of. I don't want to say blessing in disguise, but in a sense. Yeah.
I think sometimes in life, after I got fired from a job, I tried to start a union at the hospital I was working at. They didn't want that. And so I got axed, I got booted out, and then I couldn't get a job for a year. So I got back into my running. My motorcycle was stolen. That was all I had of money, no money. No. So you go back to your roots, and that's what I did. Because running lifts everybody. We're meant to move, whether running or walking, cycling, something like that. We have to work out because you feel better. You're in a better mood. And so that's what I did.
And after that, and also you were a spectator at the 71 Boston Marathon, looking on some of your fellow runners, including Frank Shorter, was it?
Well, I saw Frank win the Olympic Marathon in Munich, Germany, which kicked off the worldwide running boom. There were other great runners before Frank. There was Bikila, who took it in the Olympic Marathon in 60 and 64. He's kind of like the grandfather of modern era marathon. And his victories, I saw him run in 64. I was watching TV. I was a young track kid, Whew, this guy, how the heck does he do this? But I couldn't understand the marathon. Then when I got into the marathon, I started to understand it. And Amby, he kind of looked like Bikila. He ran just like him. He was very smooth. And everything in the marathon is conserving your energy and trying to stay calm. Try to stay calm, if you can, which is tricky.
What do you mean by modern era marathon running, as opposed to before, the modern era?
Because really, the marathon goes way back. There was a marathon right here coming into New York in 1896. Boston was 1897, after the modern Olympics. But, we all over the world, there were runners and people sent messages by foot, and so there were all kinds of races. Foot racing is ancient, going back even to the ancient Olympic Games, but they were more sprinters. They were running 200 meters and everything, but there were distance runners too, and But the modern era, I think, comes more about in the 60s and 70s, and when it became more of a global sport, But the Ethiopians were always good at the marathon, going way back,
The Kenyans right now, especially with the high altitude training that they use.
yeah, the Kenyans and Ethiopians are the best in the world. Generally speaking, overall, as countries go, the Japanese, the Americans also have some. Every country has their talent, but things go in cycles. They go in cycles, but I think that the Kenyans win more of the big marathons, but the Ethiopians are pretty much just as good, and they're starting to come out in bigger and bigger numbers.
Definitely.
Yeah. So it's very interesting, but the Americans started to put more effort into marathoning about 15 years ago. And out of that, we get runners like Ryan Hall, Meb, Dina Castor.